Welcome back to the Dream Doers podcast. I keep hearing the phrase lately, two things can be true. And I've realized sometimes it's said in a way that actually helps people, and other times it starts to blur the lines that should stay really clear. So today I'm going to talk about it because two things can be true, but not everything belongs in the same sentence. I think where a lot of confusion comes in from this is how often we feel like we have to pick a version of ourselves and stay there. Somewhere along the way, we start identifying as the nice one, the strong one, the one who always shows up, the one who keeps the peace, and then everything we do starts filtering through that identity. It feels safer to stay consistent with that version than to expand into something that might be misunderstood. But life doesn't stay in one lane like that, and the more responsibilities you carry, whether that's motherhood, business, relationships, all of it, the more you start to realize that one version of you isn't enough to handle everything well. That's where this idea actually becomes helpful, not in a confusing way, but in a grounding way, because it gives you permission to hold more than one trait at the same time without feeling like you're contradicting yourself. Being kind and having boundaries is one of the clearest examples of this. A lot of people don't realize they're not struggling with being too kind. They're struggling with having no structure around their kindness. So what started as generosity slowly turns into obligation, and then resentment follows right behind that. You say yes too quickly, and you stay available longer than you should. You take on things that were never yours to carry, and eventually you feel drained in a way that doesn't match the person you're trying to be. And instead of questioning the lack of boundaries, you start questioning yourself. That's where a small shift can change everything. Slowing down your response time, even slightly, gives you the ability to actually check in before committing. That pause doesn't make you less kind. It actually protects your ability to stay kind long term. This same balance shows up in how strong women are perceived. And this is where a lot of unnecessary pressure comes in. A woman who is clear, direct, and steady in how she communicates often gets labeled in ways that don't match what's actually happening. She's called intimidating or difficult or too much, when in reality, she's just not second-guessing herself out loud, or she's having to confront the thing that you decided to do that's harmful. She's not adding 10 extra sentences to soften something that's already clear. She's not apologizing for having a standard, and that makes people uncomfortable if they're used to something softer, more flexible, more emotionally driven. Or if you live in this world, the underlining stereotypes that we have of women is that they should be kind and soft-spoken and smiles instead of confronting things that are heavy and dark and hard. So instead of adjusting their expectations, they label her. And over time, a lot of women start adjusting themselves to avoid that label because we worry about that more. They soften their tone too much. They over-explain. They hesitate before speaking. And they start carrying this internal tension between wanting to be respected and wanting to be liked. But those two things don't always have to be in conflict. There's a way to be firm and still kind, direct and still respectful, clear and still warm. It doesn't require harshness, and it doesn't require shrinking. It requires steadiness, and steadiness is something you build. Think about it. How often do you even hear the very own president of the United States tell women reporters, why don't you just smile a little? Why don't you just look a little more kind? Because she's not smiling during an interview. How condescending is that coming from a man who wants a woman to be a specific way, or else they think she's labeled a bitch or unkind. But women are getting over it these days. That same principle shows up constantly in motherhood too. There are moments where your role feels soft and nurturing, where you're calm and patient, you're listening, you're comforting, fully present in that way. And then there are moments where something needs to be addressed immediately, where a boundary needs to be set, where behavior needs to be corrected in real time. And a lot of moms hesitate in those moments because they don't want to feel too harsh or create tension. So things get delayed or softened to the point where the message doesn't actually land. But avoiding those moments doesn't build trust. It creates confusion. Our therapist always said, clear is kind. Clear is kind. Clear is kind. Kids don't need perfection, they need consistency. They need to know where the lines are, and they need to feel that those lines don't move depending on the mood or the situation. Addressing something calmly, directly, and then moving on without dragging it out doesn't make you harsh, it makes you present. And being deeply loving while also holding a standard is not a contradiction. It's what creates stability in your home. Now, there's another side to this that really needs to be said clearly, because this is where people start to misuse this idea and get themselves stuck. And to be honest, it drives me nuts. Not everything falls under the idea of two things can be true. There's a difference between healthy balance and a lack of integrity, and those two things get mixed up all the time. Holding strength and softness at the same time, that's growth. Being kind while also having boundaries, that's alignment. Being calm and still addressing something directly, that's maturity. Those things work together because they come from the same place. But when behavior crosses into manipulation, dishonesty, harm, lies, that's not two healthy truths coexisting. That's inconsistency in character. And I know that all too well. This is where a lot of people get stuck because they try to make it make sense. When someone becomes strong enough and brave enough and ready to tell people something's happened, they've been abused by someone's harmed them, a lot of times people say there's no way, they just seem so kind over here. They look the part. They look at how someone shows up in one area and use it to explain what's happening in another. That's so harmful, you guys. They'll point to how that person is at work or how they treat other people or the moments where they seem kind, and they try to hold all of that together like it balances something out, but it doesn't. What's actually happening is someone knows how to manage perception in certain environments while something very different is happening behind the scenes. And that creates confusion, especially for the person experiencing it. Because now you're trying to reconcile two versions that don't align. And most of the time, the issue isn't that you don't understand what's happening. It's that accepting it would require a decision you're not ready to make yet. So this idea of two things can be true should never be used to excuse harm or justify staying in something that's clearly misaligned. It's meant to help you become more grounded in yourself, not more tolerant of things that go against your values. In business, the same balance shows up in a more practical way. There's always going to be a tension between wanting to serve people well and needing to protect your time and energy. And a lot of people lean too far in one direction. They're either overextending themselves, trying to keep everyone happy, or they become so rigid that they lose connection entirely. The people who build something sustainable figure out how to sit in the middle. They care about their clients, they communicate well, they deliver at a high level, and they also have structure, expectations, boundaries, and they don't constantly adjust those based on who they're dealing with. And if something feels off in your business, if you feel stretched thin or frustrated, it's usually not because you need to do more. It's because something hasn't been defined clearly. Confrontation is another area where this comes into play because that word alone, heaven forbid, makes people so uncomfortable. I have been labeled as confrontational so often, and I'm like, that's just not true. But then it dawned on me, it's because most people associate it with conflict, negativity, or tension, so they avoid it when it's actually what's needed. At its core, confrontation is just addressing something directly instead of letting it build, and something that's necessary. Things like affairs, things like overcharging, things like, in your business and in your life where you have to talk about something, we have to learn how to talk about it in a healthy way and an efficient way. But whenever people do, it's like we haven't been taught how to do this. So then they're labeled confrontational. And so many of us don't end up getting things done because we fear the label more than the consequence of not addressing it. And when you're a mom, a business owner, or anyone leading anything, you're going to have to deal with that regularly. You're going to have to address miscommunication, boundaries being crossed, expectations not being met, and avoiding those things doesn't make them disappear. It just delays them, which eventually festers into resentment And it's a downward spiral from there. So nothing good comes from ignoring things. Handling something early, calmly, and clearly keeps things clean. Our therapist all the time would say, clear is kind. Clear is kind. Clear is kind. I'm going to make a shirt one day that says that because I say it all the time. And being clear doesn't make you a difficult person. It makes you an effective one. Growth carries this same theme. There's a tendency to think you either need to be patient or driven, but the people who are building something meaningful are holding both at the same time. They understand that things take time and still moving forward daily. They're not waiting for perfect conditions and they're not rushing the process either. They're steady. And that steadiness is what creates real momentum. Internally, this might be where things settle the most. Confidence and growth aren't opposites, and feeling solid in who you are doesn't mean you've reached a final version. It means you trust yourself enough to keep evolving without questioning every step. You can be grounded and still expanding. Even emotionally, there's room for more than one truth. You can be grateful for your life and still want more and still have goals. I actually had this conversation with someone last night. They said, I'm so thankful and grateful for what I have and what I've had. And I said, but you can still also have goals. Both can be true. You can appreciate what you've built and still feel pulled towards something else. And that doesn't mean something's missing. It usually means you're growing into something new, or just adding to your life. As all of this starts to settle in, things feel less conflicting and more clear. There's less pressure to swing between extremes and more awareness of what's actually needed in the moment. You stop trying to fix yourself and start trusting your ability to respond well. And then that's where alignment really begins to show up, not in choosing one version of yourself, but in being able to carry both without losing your center. If you've been feeling pulled in different directions, trying to figure out which version of yourself you're supposed to be, this might be your answer. There isn't just one. There's a full range. And learning how to move within that range without losing who you are changes everything. If this hits home for you, please do me a favor. Send it to someone who's been in that space lately. Save it so you can come back and let it be a reminder for yourself. And if you're building something, your life, your business, the version of yourself you know you're capable of, stick around. Make sure you like and subscribe and follow me on all social platforms at thedreamdoers.podcast, because these are the conversations that are actually moving the needle forward. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time.